So y'all, we're glad to have Reverend McGee with us this afternoon. And Stacy told you this morning who he was and what his role is in the GMC. And as she explained, he's sort of the equivalent to the DS in the United Methodist Church. That's what Ben is in the GMC. And so we've asked Ben to spend a little time with us this afternoon, just kind of giving us a little overview about the GMC, and then we'll open the floor for questions for anything that he may not have answered in his presentation. Okay? Thank you, Ben, for being with us. And we enjoyed.
All right, thank you, Deborah.
We enjoyed the service this morning.
Good. I'm glad y'all were able to make that work. So glad we were able to do that for you. Okay. Well, I want to thank y'all for inviting me to come and speak about the Global Methodist Church today. I give this presentation regularly, and I enjoy doing it. I enjoy telling people about what God is doing in the Global Methodist Church, and encouraging people to take part in it. And so, you see on the screen who I am, senior pastor of Lee Joyner. We disaffiliated back in December of 22. I'm also the presiding elder of the Pelican area of the Eastern Texas Conference of the Global Methodist Church, which, as Deborah said, is basically the district superintendent over the entire state of Louisiana. I don't get paid for this work. This is all volunteer. Eventually, they're going to start giving me, I don't know, a little bit for reimbursements for travel and all, but it will never be a full paid position. The goal is we want as many pastors in churches as possible and as little overhead administration as possible. So we're asking pastors to kind of take on roles like what I'm doing. So the Global Methodist Church has been in existence for almost 1 year. Tomorrow will be the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of the Global Methodist Church. And it came about because, there are men and women who have spent decades trying to work within the United Methodist Church to reform the structure and the theology. But after the 2019 special called session of General Conference, we realized that was impossible. That even when we got things passed that we agreed with, there were people in the United Methodist Church that basically said, nope, we're not going to do it. And that's when we realized it was time to part ways. And so over the past year, we've had almost 2,000 churches worldwide who have joined the Global Methodist Church, and we expect hundreds more to join this year after annual conferences approve disaffiliations. Like here in Louisiana, the annual conference is meeting at the end of May to approve disaffiliations. We're expecting somewhere between 55 and 60 churches to disaffiliate at the end of May, and that will add to the 70 that have already disaffiliated from the Louisiana Annual Conference. From those, we currently have 10 churches that have joined the Global Methodist Church here in Louisiana, and at least 5 that have voted to become GMC and will join June 1st after their disaffiliations. Louisiana is also part of the Eastern Texas Conference of the Global Methodist Church, as is the entire state of Arkansas. And in the Eastern Texas Conference, we have 291 churches and 294 clergy. The bulk of those are in Texas. I think it's about 250 that are in Texas, and like I said, 10 in Louisiana, and the rest would be in Arkansas. And Texas has gotten pretty much all they're going to get. They might get another 10 or 15 over the next few months, but we expect Louisiana and Arkansas to continue growing significantly. In fact, my hope is to have 50 churches in the Global Methodist Church in Louisiana by the end of the year. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but that is my goal. And I know we're going to have a lot more than the 15 that we've already been notified about. Okay, so what is the Global Methodist Church? It is a church that proclaims Jesus Christ as Lord over all things and is alive with the power of the Holy Spirit. We're a church that believes in scriptural authority, and we are clear about our doctrine and mission, and we hold people accountable for missional purposes. So one of the questions, both Bill and Stacy sent me a long list of questions ahead of time. And one of the things that they asked was, how is the Global Methodist Church similar to and different from the United Methodist Church? And that's one of the things that I'm covering right now. Like I said, we believe in scriptural authority in the Global Methodist Church. We are clear about our doctrine. We know what we believe, and we are going to hold people accountable to that. As far as the official theology of the Global Methodist Church versus the United Methodist Church, it's actually very similar. If you read through our foundational documents and the United Methodist Church foundational documents, they're similar. The real difference is we are going to hold people accountable to those. And one of the other main differences is that in the Global Methodist Church, there's a lot less overhead, and we just have a simpler organization. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the Global Methodist Church, like I said, is streamlined structure, less costly, less complicated than other Wesleyan denominations. We're a church that understands that local churches make disciples, and we push as many decisions down to the local level as possible. In some ways, in the United Methodist Church, it felt like churches existed to serve the annual conference. We have completely flipped that around. The conference exists to serve local churches. No, a disciple is not made at the annual conference level. A disciple is made at the local church level. And so we want the local church to be the one driving the mission, having more of their funds available for ministry, and for the local church to make the decisions of what needs to be done and when and where and how, rather than the annual conference dictating that down. We're a church that works hard to meet people at their point of need and offer them Jesus. And so this is that, we go out and serve people, but we also talk about Jesus while we're serving people. You can't have one without the other. If y'all watched our worship service this morning, I was talking about the Renewal Center here in Monroe. That is a organization that reaches out to homeless men and women in our community and tells them about Jesus. It's a both and kind of thing. We can't have one without the other. So the Global Methodist Church is, we are clear about what we are for, and we don't want to get distracted about what we are against. If you go to the Global Methodist website, globalmethodist.org, you can click on our transitional book of doctrine and discipline. And the first section there, part 1, is our doctrine. We are clear about what we believe, and we are not going to change that. So it's not up for debate. A lot of the other things that are in that book of doctrine and discipline will be up for debate at the General Conference in 2024. But what we have in part 1, that is settled. We know what we believe about God and Jesus and Scripture and the Holy Spirit. And we want people in our denomination that believe the same as we do. If people do not believe those things or want to change them, I can still consider them Christian, but don't join our denomination. If you want things to be different theologically, there are other churches that you can be a part of. And so we want as many people in the GMC as possible, but yet we don't want people in whose mission it is to change our theology to be something that we are not today. We're a church that's burdened by the souls of those who don't yet know Jesus. So this is, Stacy asked a question of, what is something that I feel is key for your church at this point? And that's one of the things that I wrote down to that I know that right now your church is mostly composed of people who have left the St. Francisville United Methodist Church, and that's a great start. But you can't stop there. The next step is to look at those, thousands of people within your community that are not part of any church. when I was there and running those stats, it was well over 50% of the population of West Feliciana Parish that wasn't part of any church, had not attended church in over a year, and that would include Christmas and Easter. 50%, that's over 5,000 people. You're a small parish, but 5,000 people is a lot to draw from. And so be praying about ways that you can reach out to these men and women who don't yet know Jesus, or have at one point been a part of a church but have become disaffected for whatever reason. And the GMC is intentionally reaching out to people of all ages, races, nations, and more. So don't limit yourself to just people that look like me, or just people that look like you, whatever you look like. I can't see anybody. But just don't limit yourself. The only limit placed upon you is what God is calling you to do. So the mission statement of the Global Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ who worship passionately, love extravagantly, and witness boldly. And so those are three key areas in the Global Methodist Church. Worship. Worship is very important. I know at my church, it's what I spend the most time on every week. I love extravagantly. This is serving, going out and showing people Christ's love by doing things for them, by helping them out, just whatever way we need to reach out to them. We will love them in extravagant ways and witness boldly. We tell people about Jesus. We are not ashamed about what we believe. We are not ashamed about talking about Jesus, even when people don't want to hear it. That's where the bold comes in. We witness. We talk about Christ. We talk about who we love. We talk about Scripture, and we are not ashamed about our beliefs. And as far as those beliefs go, again, if you go back to the Transitional Book of Doctrine and Discipline on the Global Methodist website, you will see that our theology is firmly in line with 2,000 years of Christian doctrine and tradition. If you read through our opening theology, I would assume that every person in that room would agree with it 100%. It is exactly what you would expect a church in the Methodist Wesleyan tradition to say about who we are and what we believe. As far as the structure goes, the Global Methodist Church is intentionally less complex than the UMC. Our Transitional Book of Doctrine and Discipline is 88% smaller than the current United Methodist Book of Discipline. So I think the United Methodist Book of Discipline is around 900 pages at this point. The GMC book is less than 100. And it is, I've read both of them. And it is, the GMC one is much simpler, much easier to understand. I feel like most of it applies to most churches, whereas in the UMC, if you read through that, there's a lot in there that doesn't apply to hardly anybody. And yet it's part of the United Methodist Book of Discipline. So one question a lot of people ask about is on bishops. So we have not yet determined the exact role and authority and what bishops will look like. But a few things that we have decided is that our bishops will be term limited. We will not elect bishops for life. In the United Methodist Church and many other denominations, bishops are elected for life. We know that ours will be term limited. We have not yet determined what those terms will be. But one of the suggestions is that they can be elected to 2 6-year terms, so a total of 12 years. And at the end of that, they will go back to being pastors in local churches or retired, however they choose. We also know that the primary role of bishops is going to be to preach, teach, and defend the faith. They do have some administrative roles that they work on, but where we expect them to spend most of their time is preaching and teaching and defending the faith. And when we had a convening conference back in February in College Station, both of the active bishops in the Global Methodist Church were present with us. And this is what they did. They preached, and they preached really well. They taught. Mark Webb, I went to a seminar that he did on evangelism, which was incredible. They will defend the faith. I haven't seen that directly, but I have seen that in some of the blogs that they have put out and other articles that they have written, where they are advocating for the faith that we believe as Globalists. So I mentioned earlier about accountability. So the Global Methodist Church has accountability at all levels of the church. You know, there are ways to keep pastors accountable to our theology. Basically, if I were to ever go and to preach something that was, contrary to a stated belief in the Global Methodist Church, then it would be easy for other pastors, other laity to come in and either get me to change what I'm preaching or to exit me from the system. Same thing goes with bishops. In the United Methodist Church, bishops basically keep themselves accountable, which doesn't always work. But in the Global Methodist Church, there will be clergy and even laity that will be helping keep bishops accountable. And so the bishops are under the same rules that I am, and maybe even held to a higher standard, as they probably should be. But if they are preaching and teaching anything that goes contrary to the Global Methodist Church, they can be removed. We don't have to wait months, years to see this happen. It is a much quicker process to get someone removed. So as far as giving, as far as, how the Global Methodist Church is funded, so we call it connectional giving, which is, equivalent to the apportionments in the United Methodist Church. That is capped by our Transitional Book of Doctrine and Discipline at 6.5% of your previous year's income. However, in the Eastern Texas Conference, current connectional giving is set at 2%. And so 1% would go to the Global Methodist Church, the denomination, to fund our activities, and it really funds our overseas activities more than anything. And then 1% would go to the Eastern Texas Conference. And right now in the Eastern Texas Conference, we have four paid employees, and then we have to actually run the conferences themselves, and we have two that are happening in 2023, the one back in February and then another one coming up in July. And then we've got some money set aside for mission and ministry. We don't expect to hire many more conference staff people. We do expect to increase our mission and ministry allocations over the years. Those the budget should be coming out in the next month or two that we will then be voting on in July. So one thing that's interesting, and one difference between the United Methodist Church and the GMC and connectional giving, is that in the GMC, our connectional giving is capped at a percentage level, and we allow churches to come up with that number on their own. In the United Methodist Church, the apportionment formula is very complicated. There are very few people that understand how it works, and it requires churches to spend hours every year putting together these really long reports, which then go down to the conference and they run their computations on it, and they spit back out a number that you're required to pay for the next year. In the Global Methodist Church, it took me 5 minutes to come up with my number. It may have actually taken less than that, because all you have to do is go back to your previous year's report. You look at how much money you took in, and then you multiply that by 2%. That's it. And very simple. We don't audit we don't do the audit or the, what do they call it, statistical review in the United Methodist Church. We trust churches to give us their numbers, and then we build churches based on that. For a new church like y'all's, that is just something we would just allow you to say, what do you expect to take in? And then you set your number, and then we go with it. We also allow churches If churches are coming in and they're financially strapped because of disaffiliation fees or members leaving that were contributing a lot to the church, we allow them to apply for waivers to connectional giving, and we were told to liberally grant those waivers. So what that basically means is anybody that asks for one gets one, and we will do that at least for the next couple of years, and then we'll see where that takes us. So one thing about the Global Methodist Church is that we do not and will not ever have a trust clause. And so that means that churches own their property free and clear. The annual conference does not have any claim on property or assets or anything. This is something that everybody leaving the UMC was adamant about, that if we're going to join another denomination, it cannot have a trust clause, because we don't ever want to have to go through what United Methodist churches are going through right now with all the disaffiliation talks and votes and everything else. So our, I can't read this one. Let's see. Our annual conferences and denominational level programs are intentionally limited in scope to maximize the effectiveness of local churches. So what this means is, again, we don't have a whole lot at the top level. We are expecting churches to do most of their own ministry, obviously connecting together. That's one of the purposes of the annual conference, is to connect churches together. But it's not to say create an annual conference program and expect all churches to participate in it. We will have some programs. We've already done some programs, but the goal is for churches to do the bulk of that ministry connected together. So one of my questions that was submitted earlier was about children and youth programs. So this kind of falls in that category. First off, we don't have a whole lot being done right now because we're brand new, but we do have some task forces looking into what can we do as a conference to connect churches together for children and youth ministry. The Texas Annual Conference had a great camping program for United Methodist churches, and so the Eastern Texas Conference is looking into what can we do to support Christian camps for our kids and our youth that fit the theology of the Global Methodist Church. They were not able to put anything together for this summer, but they are definitely working on plans for next summer. Let's see. Okay, so clergy in the Global Methodist Church. There are two primary orders of clergy, elders and deacons. I am an ordained elder. And local pastors are not one of our categories. I mean, we have a transitional local pastor category that is meant for somebody coming into the Global Methodist Church who was a local pastor in the UMC, but has not yet met the credential, the educational credentials to be ordained as a deacon. But that's the only time that you'll hear the word local pastor in the Global Methodist Church. We want people to be ordained. My associate pastor here at my church, Betty Swanson, is a good example of this. She's been in ministry for 22, 23 years, served faithfully. She completed a course of study 10 or 12 years ago, and it's just an amazing pastor. When she was in the United Methodist Church, she always only would have ever been a local pastor. And so one of the things that means is when she quit being a pastor, when she was no longer appointed, she would revert back to laity status. I don't like that. I didn't like that when I was in the UMC, and I talked about it and tried to make some changes within the UMC for that. But in the Global Methodist Church, we just did away with the local pastor category altogether. And so we will ordain local pastors based on their educational criteria. So my associate pastor was ordained a deacon and then an elder, like 5 seconds in between them, at the convening conference back in February. And I was excited because I got to lay hands on her, and it was amazing. So we also have a category of a certified lay minister. And so this is similar to the CLM position in the United Methodist Church. But within the Global Methodist Church, we've been using a lot of certified lay ministers in churches, especially the smaller churches, throughout our connection. And we expect that to continue. And we are working on the education for CLMs. And we have also come up with, so there was a question on here about educational requirements for pastors. Basically, if a pastor already had a status in the UMC, like for me, I went to Asbury. That would actually be simple because we endorse Asbury in the GMC. But there are pastors that went to Perkins and went to Duke, and even one that went to Iliff, which I would never recommend anyone to go to today. But when they went, it was okay. And they're now in the GMC, and we've got no problem with that. However, if somebody's just starting out, we do have 6 seminaries that we endorse. Asbury is one of them, Truett over at Baylor University, the Wesley House of Studies. That is another one that we endorse. There's a few more. We also have 2 course or study programs, although it's going by different names. We haven't settled on that terminology just yet. We have 2 that we currently endorse, and I know we've got more that are in the works. We have a strong commitment to female clergy and clergy of color. There are many women, men, white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, you name it, in the Global Methodist Church at all levels. And I wouldn't be a part of a denomination that did things otherwise. Another big difference in clergy in the Global Methodist Church is that pastors are not guaranteed an appointment. When I was in the United Methodist Church, I was guaranteed a job at all times at a minimum salary. In the Global Methodist Church, the only thing that gives me guaranteed appointment is me continuing to do a good job. Now, the flip side of this is that also means that we cannot guarantee pastors for churches. We do our best to find pastors for every church within the Global Methodist Church. And even when we don't have a long-term permanent pastor, so far in the Eastern Texas Conference, every church has had at least someone, whether it's a lay person, a retired pastor, an interim pastor, or a full-time pastor. We've had at least someone that is in the pulpit every Sunday, and that is our desire to continue. Let's see. So how appointments are made. So how this would work for y'all specifically is if y'all chose to become a Global Methodist Church and voted it in through your church council, I would come in as the presiding elder. And actually, I think Jason Burnham, as a new church start, I think y'all fall under Jason Burnham. But anyway, one of us would come in, maybe both of us. We would consult with your church about the needs of your church and your community, because it's not just about the church, it's also about the community. And then we would look through our list of clergy. And right now, we've got about a dozen clergy that are on our list as full-time pastors. Some of them are from Louisiana. Some of them are from Texas. Some of them are from other parts of the United States. The vast majority of them are coming to us from the United Methodist Church, but we do have a few that have come from other denominations as well. But if they come from something other than the United Methodist Church, we thoroughly vet them to make sure that they are Wesleyan. If they come from the United Methodist Church, we ask them questions to make sure that they agree with Global Methodist theology, and then we allow them to come in. And then our goal is to find 2 or 3 potential clergy, and then we would bring them into you to interview, and then you would make a choice. And by you, it's not a church vote; it's the SPR or the church council, depending on how you got things structured, who would vote on who the next pastor will be. And then when clergy are appointed, they are appointed to indefinite terms. And so in the United Methodist Church, what that meant is I was appointed on a 1-year basis. So every year, I had to say whether I wanted to stay or leave, and then the cabinet made its own decision, sometimes without really any input from me, is how it felt. But in the Global Methodist Church, when I became a Global Methodist elder and Lee Joyner became a Global Methodist Church, I was appointed here. There is no end time to that. I am here until I decide to leave or until my church decides that it is time for me to leave. The conference is not going to come in and say, Ben, you have to move to, Homa or, Feliciana Methodist or, wherever some of these other churches that we've got. They're not going to tell me I have to move. It is always my true choice. So the bottom line is Global Methodist Church is committed to sharing the good news of Jesus to all people so that everyone can be saved and become a disciple of Jesus. That is what we exist for. And I can talk more. Here, this doesn't apply to you. But I can talk more about the theology and or the structure of the Global Methodist Church. So let me ask this, Deborah. I know that I've got a list of questions that I got from Bill and from Stacy. Do you want me to walk through these questions, or do you want me to take questions from the floor?
Why don't we take questions from the floor first?
Okay.
If that's okay, and then we'll go through those.
Okay. I'm gonna go back to
Do you have
the
questions
screen.
for Ben?
I have a list. Somebody handed me that asks about pastors.
Go ahead.
Ben,
Yes.
this is Kathy Howard. I have a list of pastor questions that somebody handed me, so I guess I'm interested. Provide your views on key skills for a pastor for our church and your view on full-time versus a shared pastor. We have some concerns about affording a full-time pastor right now, so tell us the benefits and the whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So and let me just say, so the first part of your question, actually both of these questions, Jason Burnham is going to come and meet with y'all next week and ask this question to him. He will be able to answer it better than I can, specifically because you are a new church plant and that is his area of expertise. I've had a little bit of training in this, so I can answer it a little bit. So one of the things that I would say on this is some of the skills that your pastor needs to have is they need a passion for reaching new people with the gospel. As I was talking about earlier, you've got a great start with your church right now, mostly from people that have left the United Methodist Church there in St. Francisville and wanted to become part of Feliciana Methodist. That is wonderful. It can't stop there. And so you need a pastor that has a passion for reaching new people and not just taking, well, I won't even say not taking them from other churches, but reaching out and finding people that aren't part of any church so that they can come in. And the passion actually is more important than the skill because we can teach skills. We can't teach passion. Passion is something that is God-given. And so you want someone that is passionate about sharing the gospel. Yeah. So you also want somebody that is at least that is organizationally minded. Again, we can teach the skills necessary to organize a new church, but you want someone that at least can understand that and can learn that and doesn't just hate organizational matters. As far as full-time versus part-time, so kind of a general rule of thumb is that if you are worshiping, over 120, 125 in worship, that is a full-time job. If you want your church to be worshiping at that level, then you need to staff for that level. And if it's, so we've got a church in Winfield that's got about 20 people that is starting a new church plant, very similar to what is happening there in St. Francisville. They're not getting a full-time pastor because they not only can they not afford a full-time pastor, they don't need a full-time pastor. They've got 20, 25 people. But if you've got 125 people, just the amount of time that it takes to meet with those people and provide the ministries that are necessary for a church that large takes full time. That is my opinion. Now, again, I know there's some financial concerns in there, and those are some things that Jason is going to address with you. He and I have had a conversation about it, so I know he's going to address that. All right, what else you got for me?
Ben, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. We've been beat up pretty bad, trying to get out of the UMC.
Yes.
If we join the global, what does it take? We find out we don't like it. What's it take to get out?
There are no payments that will be required, and there is a 90-day discernment period, and that's it. We haven't actually defined what that discernment will look like, but it's not going to be anything like the highly structured, highly restrictive discernment process that the United Methodist Church placed upon churches in disaffiliation. Basically, if churches want to leave, we're going to let them leave, and there won't be any payments due, and nothing will be owed to the annual conference. But we do want to make sure that churches want to leave, and it's not just one or two people that are making a ruckus, and they're the only ones that really need to be leaving. So it is fairly simple, and no payments are required. I think that's the best answer there.
Go ahead, Kathy.
So say we as a church pick to join, what kind of timing does it take for us to get a pastor?
Yeah, so after your church joins the Global Methodist Church, the next step is to create a church profile, which can be done in as little as a week, because y'all have already done a lot of the work that needs to be done for that anyway. And then hopefully within the next week or two, the appointive cabinet, the presiding elders coming together, will have identified some people, and we can start bringing them in. So, I mean, my hope would be that within a month of you joining the Global Methodist Church, we have people identified for you. And then so one thing I didn't talk about earlier is that a church and a pastor have to agree to come together, because again, the conference doesn't send. We help create those connections, and we make sure that clergy are properly vetted before they go. And but I mean, if we send you somebody and y'all are happy and everything works out, I mean, they can move in as soon as y'all can get them in. So I mean, it could be as soon as I would say 6 weeks. It may take a couple of months, but yeah, I mean, that's my best guess. I mean, again, we can't make any guarantees, because we might send you 3 pastors and you say, no, we don't like any of these, send us some more. And then we'll send you 3 more. And then you say no to those. And I'm talking about a church in Texas that got 7 pastors. I think we finally found them the right one. This has been a 6-month process. They're very persnickety.
Hey, Ben, we're going to have to change batteries in our speaker, so hold on just a second. We're not going anywhere. We're just losing audio for a few minutes.
Okay, just let me know when you're ready.
Oh, actually, can y'all hear him while he's talking? Yeah. Okay, they can hear you. So while we're changing the big speaker batteries, we're gonna keep going.
Okay, great.
Okay, so
What's the next question?
Kathy, what's your next question?
Oh, now I know who handed this.
He's seen those already. He knows who those came from, all those pastor questions.
Refer me to Jason. No.
Look, I've got most of them right here already.
I just got this 3 minutes ago.
Okay,
Highlight
You're
salary
fine.
requirements with emphasis on what is required, healthcare, pension, housing. And we're getting some differences of opinions on housing, whether it's switching from the old norm of us providing the parsonage rather than nowadays possibly giving them the allowances. Did you
All
understand?
right, so I'm going to address the housing allowance question first. And in general, churches are moving to do housing allowances more than they are in offering parsonages. And some of the reasoning behind this is that pastors tend to prefer to pick our own houses. We like to pick where we're going to live, what the house is going to look like. You know, like in Monroe, what school district I'm going to be in. I know that's not an issue for y'all because it's only one school district. But that actually mattered for me. I didn't want, my church had a parsonage and I didn't want to live in it because of the school district. So they actually sold the parsonage and gave me a housing allowance. And so we bought a house in a much better school district that we're very happy with. Not quite as good as West Feliciana, but still good. And then another thing about housing allowances.
we have an opening, by the way, for a pastor. And a good school system.
I know. But my daughter has only 1 year of high school left and she does not want to move.
Uh-huh.
Yes. All right. So another thing about housing allowances is different from parsonages. Parsonages facilitate the easy move of a pastor from one location to the next. And so when you've got a system like the United Methodist Church where pastors are moving frequently, parsonages are necessary. Because then the pastor, that's one less thing that they have to think about. When you've got a system like the Global Methodist Church where we are expecting pastors to stay longer in their positions, housing allowances make more sense because it allows the pastor to build equity in a home, and it's a sign from the church that they are expecting the pastor to stay longer. Now, St. Francisville poses some interesting challenges to this because housing in West Feliciana Parish is fairly expensive. And so, so I'm talking about this from a level of like Monroe or, Baton Rouge or, larger communities. When you get to the smaller communities, sometimes parsonages still make sense. And so that may be a question that you need to have with an incoming pastor, is just ask them, would you prefer a parsonage or a housing allowance? Me personally, even moving to St. Francisville, I'd still prefer a housing allowance. But there may be some pastors that don't have equity built up in a home and would not be able to afford the kind of down payment that they would need to buy a decent home there in West Feliciana Parish. So, does that somewhat answer the question? Oh, no, you had the other part of the question. What are the other things that are required? Yeah, so healthcare is required in the Global Methodist Church. And so there is a Global Methodist Church health plan. It is it's fairly expensive. I'll be honest. It's $24,000 a year for a family. In the United Methodist Church, it's about $17,000 a year for a family. One of the benefits of the Global Methodist Church is, if you don't need to insure the entire family, then there are less expensive options for a single pastor or just a pastor plus one dependent, or also like what's happening in my family is my wife gets insurance through her job. And so, so I fall in one of the exemption categories. And so we pay 6,000 a year for my wife's insurance, rather than 24,000 a year for the Global Methodist insurance. And I think they're equivalent. My church decided to kick in that $6,000 and give it to me in salary, because it's being deducted from Elisa's paycheck. And but in the process, they saved themselves $19,000. So they thought, or 18,000, but which they thought was a good deal. Pension is required in the Global Methodist Church. It is about 10% of your income. It is slightly less than what it is for a United Methodist Church pastor. I think it's about 12% for United Methodist Church pastors, but it's 10% in the Global Methodist Church. Yeah. And so those are the only things that are required. And everything else is just what you work out with the pastor that is coming in.
Hold up.
10% of what goes into retirement?
You said 10% of what? That would be 10% of the salary plus housing.
All right.
And if you have a parsonage, there's a way to calculate. I think it's basically you take the salary and you multiply by 25%, and that becomes the amount that we use for calculating a parsonage.
Can I switch gears off of the pastor and have a question about the
Wait, can I ask one more that follow up to what Kathy asked about the kind of the benefits package? So
Yes.
just ballpark, if we were to get a full-time pastor with a benefits package, similar to what we had with Daniel or where you are, would we be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 150,000 a year? Is that kind of a ballpark number?
numbers? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, my church currently pays me about 113, but again, the insurance, you know, they pay 18,000 less than what insurance would be. So about 130 is roughly what I'm making. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, Kathy.
Okay, y'all call it connectional giving instead of apportionments. So does that include like if you do capital campaigns, or is that just on your general budget operating revenue?
Your general operating budget. Yeah, just what comes in the plate to fund regular ministries.
So like, what about the designated funds, like capital campaign, of course, would be designated toward paying for a portionage. What if we had other designated areas, those two, or just the capital campaign?
Yeah, no, you take away all the designated funds. There's a sheet that explains all of this, but it's pretty simple. You know, so basically, you know, if somebody gave money specifically, you know, to, you know, buy some new speakers, that the batteries don't run out after 30 minutes, or you know, to do something specific, you know, that does not count. It's just what comes in on a regular basis to fund regular ministry.
So on your website, you have sections under the finance and stuff. Would we find that under a section in apportionments, or is it on the website under, like I saw y'all's blogs, like I looked at the finance board, you printed out some of those. Where would we find that?
That's a good question. It is probably on the website. It's probably on the FAQs, but I think you're actually trying to make this more complicated than it is, and that's we see this a lot. We are trying to greatly simplify this. Basically, whatever number you give us, we take that number. We trust that you are giving us the right number. We're not strict about where this number comes from. We do not check you. We assume that you are telling us the right number, and we go with it. So, and I know, so I think that the thing that I'm quoting from is actually in the in the congregational profile, which you complete either as you're becoming a church or right after you become a Global Methodist Church. So I'm pretty sure that's where that is all coming from.
Yes, Stacy has a question.
Okay.
Okay, interim pastor.
Mhm.
Tell me what that looks like and how that, I'm trying to sort through whether that's a possibility for our church or not.
I mean, interim pastors are always a possibility. I mean, our goal is not to find an interim pastor. Our goal is to find a permanent pastor. If we need to find an interim pastor, we do that. So I would say that we've got, I don't know, when we started January 1 in the Eastern Texas Conference, I think there were well over a dozen churches that were being served by interims. We're down to 2. And now we've got some more that are opening up. But, you know, again, I mean, that is a definite possibility, but it is never our preference.
Sure.
Or let me rephrase that. It is rarely our preference.
Well, speed is our preference. So it's interim, but anyhow, I guess I'm speaking for myself. I shouldn't do that.
Would interim mean part-time or just temporary appointment?
Temporary appointment until you get in full time. Okay, I want to go back to the housing allowance. Let's assume that we go that way.
Okay.
And let's assume that the person, you know, well, first of all, we don't know what's available in St. Francisville. I mean, if you go on the real estate website, you may not see much, but there may be other things that are, if you ask the right person, you never know what can come up. But anyhow, let's just say worst case scenario, we have to put someone in Zachary.
Mhm.
Okay, because that's a lot of housing there, and there's a lot of apartments there and all that other stuff. Would you typically, would a pastor typically expect for his or her full rental to be paid as housing allowance and then transportation? Is that what we should anticipate, or what should we expect?
So, yes, they would expect their entire housing costs to be paid for by housing allowance, but that has more to do with tax purposes than anything else. As in, like for me, I willingly took a slightly lower salary so that I could have more in a housing allowance so that I could buy the house that I wanted. And so my recommendation would be to look around in Zachary, see what it would cost to get a, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, apartment or house, and just see what the average cost of that would be. And, and make something like that your offer. And then if the pastor came in and said, well, I'd really like to get, something bigger. And so for tax purposes, take some money out of my salary and put it into housing. And, it's no different for the church, but it helps the clergy with their taxes.
Is it just the cost of the mortgage or the rent, or is it utilities, insurance? How is that figure calculated?
Yeah, so I actually received 2 different numbers. So I receive a housing allowance, and that pays for my mortgage, which includes, taxes, insurance, and the actual, principal and interest on the mortgage. And then I receive a utilities allowance, which covers electric, gas, other stuff. Basically, whatever the IRS will allow me to deduct legally. So again, this is a tax benefit for clergy, and so it is something that is negotiable.
Other questions?
The housing allowance includes property tax.
The
Yes.
housing allowance includes
But if
property.
it's in a mortgage, yeah, if it's in a mortgage, that's all.
So then on the housing allowance, again, it's pastor expectations. That's really the question I'm asking. If it was a housing allowance for the pastor and he was buying a house, would you be considering, I mean, I would think that you're not trying to pay his whole mortgage because he's building up equity in the house, right? Or is that?
Yes, you're paying their entire mortgage. Yes,
You are paying.
You're paying the entire
Mhm.
mortgage.
yes. But again, remember, the housing allowance is meant to be a tax benefit for clergy. And so yeah, I mean, I have a lower salary because I have a higher housing allowance.
There was another question back here, personal expenses for a pastor. Like
Okay.
mileage if the person's commuting from Zachary to whatever, or driving to a funeral in another location. What would be an expectation there?
Yeah, so I get $600 a month for that, and other pastors get less. I mean, I would say, and I remember when I was in St. Francisville, I think I got $500 or $600 a month, and I needed that because I had to regularly drive down to Baton Rouge to visit people in the hospital.
Yeah.
And so now commuting from your house to your office is not a deductible. You cannot pay them for that. At least not in a tax deferred arrangement. So again, this is governed by the IRS as to what is and isn't allowed. Yeah.
Last question for me, and then I'm gonna sit down. So office, we're sitting here, we don't have any offices, we have this here. But is there not a tax benefit for clergy for using their house as an office?
Yeah, so one of the tax benefits is related to that mileage that I was just telling you about. If you have an official designated spot in your house that qualifies as an office, and there are strict IRS rules about this, then that is your office, and any driving you do for church business thus counts as mileage. So that would be one of the main benefits that isn't already covered by the housing allowance benefits. So yeah, and I would say that in a new church, no pastor coming to a new church would expect to have an office paid for from the get-go. They would expect to either have an office out of their home or to kind of set up shop throughout town whenever and however that's what I would do. I would bring my laptop and just kind of go where I needed to go.
Other questions for Ben? Any other questions for Ben? Yeah, the new ones? Ben, what did you say the total number for disaffiliated churches in Louisiana was?
So there are 70 that have already left, and my projection for the end of May is 55 to 60.
More.
So-
More, yeah, in addition.
120, 125, something like that.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Okay.
We won't know that official number until May 25th, like 2 or 3 days before that special called session. I don't expect to know an official until shortly beforehand.
Go ahead. Magruder?
What do you think? I mean, we've talked about our neighbors, Woodville and New Road, disaffiliating and going global. What do you think the possibility of sharing would be?
Did you hear that?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a possibility of sharing a pastor with another church. This kind of goes back to that. Do you need a full-time or do you need a part-time? And I mean, if you've got, if you continue to have over 100 people in worship, I would say you need a full-time pastor for your church. If you can't afford it, that's a different story. But I think your financials are less about whether you can afford it and more about what you are choosing to pay for and what choices you are making based on the amount that you have coming in. Which are really good questions to be asking, by the way. I'm not trying to critique what you're doing. I'm just saying, if you're choosing to, to build a church immediately or to build a parsonage or something like that, then obviously that will lower the amount of money that you have for other expenses. So it's just trying to figure out where you need to put your priority. Jason, he comes next week. He will help you talk through that.
Any other questions?
Curious.
Go ahead, Liz.
I was curious, you gave the number of disaffiliated churches, and I'm assuming some of them are through medicine. Some of them are not. How many are like us who did not disaffiliate officially, but are planting or trying to get some, or needing a minister like we are, kind of from scratch?
Yeah, so there are a few churches. I know that we're working with a group in Homa. We're working with a group in Winfield. We're working with a group in Baton Rouge, and we're working with y'all. Those are the only ones right now that we are working with. We do have some. We are waiting to see some votes as to whether we will need to plant churches in other areas. So I would say that there's 4 or 5 churches that are in the same boat as y'all at this moment, but maybe more coming.
Any other questions?
John Ritchie's been quiet.
John Ritchie, do you have any questions on your end? You're muted if you do. Margaret, do you have any questions?
I'm good, thank you.
John Ritchie, do you have any questions?
No, just listening.
Okay, good.
Me
Good.
too.
I just wanted to be sure. Hold on.
Ben, this is Nancy Bailey. Is there someone here can explain this? I was a little bit confused when you were explaining elders, deacons, and pastors.
Local pastors.
Local pastors. So can you briefly show that structure again? I apologize, I just didn't get it.
Yeah, let me bring back that slide. It'll take me just a second. Okay. Go back, share my screen. Okay. There it goes. Okay, so yeah, so there are 2 primary orders of clergy. So elders, and so elders would be people that have completed maybe completed a seminary degree like I did. I have a Master of Divinity. It would also be people that have completed course of study, like my associate pastor, Betty Swanson. And these are people that have kind of reached the top of their educational requirements, and they've also had experience in ministry. They've been interviewed by lots of different people. They've answered all the historic questions from John Wesley. Deacons are people that have completed less educational requirements in general. Some have actually completed as much as I have. But deacons are those that so we basically got 2 kinds of deacons. One would be the person that is on their way to become an elder, but they are ordained as a deacon after they've completed some of their education and gotten, had some experience in ministry and again been interviewed by people, answered some questions. Most deacons are on their way to becoming elders. Some deacons have decided that they're going to stop, and that is where they're just going to remain a permanent deacon, kind of like in the United Methodist Church where we had permanent deacons. So
Can you talk about the local pastor and a little bit about how that role differs?
Yeah, so a local pastor in the United Methodist Church was somebody that did not have a seminary degree, but had gone through the course of study. We do not have a local pastor position in the Global Methodist Church. We have done away with that category. And so basically, once somebody begins their educational requirements, they are on track to either become a certified lay minister, a deacon, or an elder. Those are the only categories that we will grant. And so one of the benefits of course of study is that you don't have to have a college degree beforehand in order to go through course of study. I mean, it's still a rigorous process, but you don't have to have a college degree first. You can just go straight into the course of study program. I was talking with a guy from Benton just last week. He's an electrician by trade, did not finish college, but wants to be a pastor. And so I told him, I said, then you need to do course of study. I mean, he's smart enough. He's got all the skills. He just, needs more education in pastoring. So I told him to do course of study, even though he's about my age. I mean, he's young enough that seminary would be fine, but not if he's got to go to college first.
Underwear.
Can deacons administer all of the sacraments?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Nancy.
So, if you could help clarify, so if GMC no longer has pastor positions per se, if we were to join GMC and then there was a candidate search, what would you be searching for?
Oh, local, she's not clear on the local pastor. She's confusing that, I think, with somebody who actually resides here. The local pastor.
Yeah, so a local pastor is a status in the United Methodist Church. They're a pastor. So Mike Clark is a local pastor in the United Methodist Church.
Okay.
He, lives in St. Francisville, pastors at Tunica, and, but he's not an elder for a variety of reasons. But one thing is he never wanted to leave St. Francisville. As an elder in the United Methodist Church, I had to agree to be sent anywhere within the state. And so that was one of the big differences between a local pastor, as in they were pastor in a local area, did not want to move out of there, and an elder who was eligible to go anywhere within the conference. Again, we are eliminating that status in the Global Methodist Church. So, I mean, we will still have pastors who serve local churches. We call them elders and deacons.
Okay, last call. Any other questions? Jan, go ahead.
Again, we're looking at the pastors, we have elders, I understand, deacons, I understand, so what is certified lay minister? Is that again just like a tier, a lower tier? That's you, Jan.
Yeah, so certified lay ministers are these would be people that are serving in pastoral functions. Many certified lay ministers are on their way to becoming a deacon or an elder because they've begun taking some of that educational process. Some of them have just decided they don't want to be clergy, but they do want to serve in a ministerial capacity for some time, because when you're ordained, it's a lifetime ordination. Certified lay ministers just know that, they want to serve in ministry, but maybe not forever. Or maybe they're 70 years old and realize they don't have time to do all the educational stuff, but they want to start serving. So we get them into the certified lay ministry process, and we allow them to serve for a few years while they're still in good health and still have the ability to serve.
Question for John Bell, being in classification of lay minister.
Did you hear that, Ben?
I don't know enough about John's situation to know where he would fall. But I mean,
In 2 years of life.
is he ordained anywhere?
No.
Okay. Then yeah, he could come into our process, and we would start his training and then talk to him about what he would, what would work best for him. I mean, that's what I'm doing with a lot of other pastors, or a lot of other people that want to become pastors. We come in, we talk to them, We don't force anybody to do anything. It is on them to pursue that and to tell us what they want to do. And then we help facilitate that.